Well, let's start with some of the big news that has been making the headlines this week, and starting with Qatar, which on the 26th of October sentenced 8 former Indian Navy officers to death, reportedly on charges of spying and espionage. These former officers were employed with a private defense firm in Qatar and were detained by the Qatari intelligence service in Doha on August the 30th last year. While the Qatari government never officially disclosed the charges against them, reports say that they stand accused of spying on Qatar's advanced submarines, which were being constructed in collaboration with an Italian shipbuilding company for Israel. The 8 veterans were employed by a defense services provider owned by an Omani national, a retired squadron leader of the Royal Omani Air Force, who was also arrested, but then was subsequently released in November. Now, India has expressed shock at all of this, and expressing shock on the death sentence, the MEA in a statement said it is exploring all legal options to contest the sentence. So clearly it is a difficult situation that is unfolding out there, and also a lot of people are wondering about how this plays out in the geopolitics of the entire region. It's no secret that Qatar has in recent times become also a hub for groups like the Hamas, for example, and others who've been taking shelter out there. Qatar has also been accused of being very involved in anti-Israeli activities. Al Jazeera, you know, the controversies around that. Is this a reaction to some of the stances that India has been taking on Israel? Is this something completely unconnected? A lot of things will need to be understood, and we'll see how the situation unfolds in Qatar with those 8 former Indian Navy officers. But let's turn now to the special big interview here on the India Story this week. The ambassador of Israel to India, Naor Gilon. Now, I don't have to tell you that international headlines continue to be fixed on the situation in the Middle East, in particular what seems to be a humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip with a large number of civilian casualties. But that, of course, after that terrible terror attack by Hamas on October the 7th, in which a large number of Israeli civilians died and a large number of them were also taken hostage. So a number of issues, of course, need to be looked at, including whether there's going to be a ground offensive, what happens with the humanitarian situation in Gaza, what can be done to minimize civilian casualties. Does this have broader implications for the region? And of course, what Israel expects of India. We've heard the ambassador saying, for example, that he would like India to declare Hamas as a terrorist organization. So without further ado, here's my conversation with the ambassador of Israel to India, Naor Gilon, just a short while back. Well, we now have with us on the India Story His Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel to India, Mr. Naor Gilon. I wish, Your Excellency, we were speaking in more pleasant times than this. Let me just begin by asking you, it's not that many days since the 7th of October. There must still be a lot of shock, a lot of sorrow, a lot of grieving in Israel, and concern about the fate of the hostages.
Yeah, this unprecedented attack on Israel on October 7, really, it's something we never knew before. Something in the magnitude and the viciousness of the attack. We had, the numbers, just understanding. They came in the morning of a Jewish holiday, invaded 30 Jewish communities. They killed around 1,400 people, which, if you compare it in numbers and percentage to India, it's more than 2 lakh people. In one day, in 12 hours, in 10, 12 hours, they went from house to house and butchered, really, families. They burned kids together, they decapitated, they raped, they shot children, and they took quite many hostages. We don't know the exact number, and when you're asking if we are still mourning, only half of the people were buried so far, more or less. We still didn't identify quite a large. We identify now 80% of the missing, and there's still people missing. So the numbers don't count yet. We don't know exactly how much are kidnapped and how many are alive. And they kidnap from 9-month-old children, babies, to 80, which was released. And so the country is still going through the trauma. It's not over yet. And if I am right, it's not going away anytime soon. I mean, it will stay with us as a trauma, as a scar, for a very long time.
You made a very fascinating comparison there. It's like per capita, if you compare it to India, it's like 2 lakh people dying. India's been through Mumbai, 26/11, 9/11, but the number of people is, if you're looking at it from a percentage point, a lot of people in Israel would therefore know somebody who has either been killed or taken hostage.
Yeah, even in an embassy, which is a small, relatively small representation of Israel, we have here 2 cousins who were killed, 2 cousins of Israelis who work in the embassy. We had many friends of people who were killed. We have quite a few people who are after military service, younger people. So their friends were either in the party or in the military part, which was... So, yeah, even for us here, we know, everyone knows someone connected. So it's a huge trauma. And in Israel, of course, it's a very small country. And everyone knows everyone, and the trauma is there, very deep trauma, and it's continuing. Don't forget that Israel is under already, we got 8,000 rockets from Gaza towards Israeli population. So even on my personal level, my wife is in Israel to be with the rest of the family to help them as much as she can. So my wife is there, my 4 children are there, my 5 grandchildren are there. My father, who is reaching 89 now, my in-laws who are not much younger than him, all these people, a few times a day, they go into the shelter. Yesterday, a bomb was able to penetrate through Iron Dome in Rishon LeZion, where my father lives, not too far from his home. It's a thing that is going. Everyone is carrying some kind of load, emotional load out of this thing.
Ambassador Gilon, though it has to be said, when you're looking at the situation now 20 days later, it's almost seeming as though the world's getting divided into 2 sides. There's a certain view which is saying, look what happened on October the 7th, look at the suffering that the Israeli people went through. But at the same time, there's also a great deal of concern and shock and horror and sympathy at what's happening in Gaza right now, because 700, 800 people, if there are 700 or 800 people dying every single day, Gaza is also only 2.2 million people. So there are a lot of people dying there, and a lot of them would be innocents.
I would go I think that there is no comparison whatsoever. So one is that there is a vicious attack intended at civilian populations. By the way, also the rockets from Gaza are going to civilian population. They're not going to any military camps or this is not the idea. They want very heavily populated areas. The other problem is that Hamas already in the previous skirmishes and fights that we had with them always used the civilian population as their human shield. And why do they do that? Because they cannot compete or fight with the Israeli Defense Forces in open area without this protection. So it's not by coincidence that a few days ago a hospital was hit by a rocket of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they put it next to hospitals, they put it next to schools, hoping that when we retaliate, we hit schools or hospitals or whatever damage we can create, we might create in order to have pressure, international pressure on Israel to stop the operation. So their way is to hit and then come behind and hit behind their population. So we find a situation where Israel, on the one hand, is trying to protect with Iron Dome and everything our civilian population. And on the other hand, we are trying also to protect the Gazan civilian population from 2 reasons. One is the humanitarian. We don't want to kill people, and we are law-abiding people, international law and everything. And the other one is we understand that if we make mistakes and hit civilian population, we will be limited in our time of operation. There will be pressure on us to stop. So we have the humanitarian is the leading one, but also on the other, we understand the cost of mistake. We are doing any effort to avert the situation where we hit civilians, but Hamas is underground, letting the civilians be above. If we do it according to international law, you have to warn people, not to be in areas. So we ask the population to go south, the northern, because we intend to go into land operation into the northern part. And Hamas is forbidding them from going down. They put roadblocks. They threatened them. We have some
But there are airstrikes that have taken place in the south as well. You told people to move south, but there are airstrikes taking place in the south as well. And so that's the reason why the United Nations and others have also been coming out and saying, where do the people go? Also on the question of things like fuel supplies, which you're saying you don't allow fuel supplies to go in because Hamas would use it to ventilate the tunnels or whatever it is that they're doing. But that has its own humanitarian consequences.
So, first of all, we agreed with the UN on zones where they can take the people out of the inhabited areas in order for them to be in a place that is not going to be touched. You have to understand there is no immunity. The fact that we want to go in the ground operation and we will go to the north probably in the first main effort, doesn't mean that other parts can be immune. So in this way, we are giving immunity also to the terrorists. No, the effort will be concentrated there, but we will do also targeting strikes if we have information of people, of terrorists hiding and things like that. We do that, of course, but it's much safer for the population to be in the south rather than in the north. That's very clear. When it comes to humanitarian, again, according to international law, let's start from the dry law. If the supply that you want to give anything is used in order to hit the population of the other side, you are not supposed to give it. You're even expected not to do that. And fuel, as you said, it's for the rockets it's used, and it's used also to ventilate these tunnels that are there in order to attack Israeli soldiers, hide from them and attack them once they are there. So in general, we don't have to, but even worse than that, Hamas, UNRWA, the UN organization there, had fuel in its storage. Hamas came. It was intended for all the population. Hamas came, just I think 500,000 liters, just took from them. UNRWA tweeted it. So it's not, the situation is very complex. Even if we give something to the population, it will go to the needs of Hamas because they control the area. So, it's very sad for the population. But that's the fact of life. I mean,
if I could just, here in India, we know strangers to terror. We've suffered over many years with terror attacks. So if I could just share one of the examples, of how to respond to that, which I've seen a lot of people talking about on social media. After 26/11, which was, when a very similar attack happened on India, there wasn't an immediate reaction, and in fact, a long period was built up to almost get international opinion very strongly against Pakistan. And that played itself out rather well over the last 15, 20 years from an Indian point of view, that Pakistan has now been painted as a state sponsor of terror. I'm just putting this to you as a hypothesis. Do you think Israel moved too fast in by immediately going in and attacking Gaza? The world had no time to really register or to sympathize with what had happened on October the 7th because the focus immediately shifted to Gaza and those pictures of Palestinian children in Gaza?
No, I don't think so. I think that people don't understand what happened on October 7th. This is a change of paradigm. What happened in October 7th, that on Friday evening, October 6th, we went to sleep with Hamas as our neighbor in our minds. We woke up in the morning with ISIS as our neighbor. So we thought that Hamas is a more pragmatic organization. The concept that failed in Israel, that led to many failures afterwards, probably it will be still investigated when the guns stop, as we say, at the end of the war. The concept was that Hamas has some responsibility as the ruler of Gaza to its citizens. So if you do dual containment, on the one hand, you have deterrence on the military side. On the other hand, we work with them to improve the level of living of the population. And this means that we enabled tens of thousands to go and work in Israel, which brought a lot of money. We let merchandise go in almost freely, as long as it was not theoretically used for terror. But we see how well that worked. And everything collapsed because we didn't get it that they don't care about the population. We didn't get it that when they use the population as human shields, it's a sign to you in the past that they don't care about the population. They care about their ideology. If you go into the covenant of Hamas, they don't accept Israel in any kind of border. It's a different, so since it's a watershed event from our point of view, we must distract Hamas. They cannot stay in the area. They cannot stay from two reasons. One is that they will repeat their atrocities. And second, if it will be perceived that this jihadist ISIS Hamas organization, one, it will give fuel and back push to many jihadist organizations that were, the Islamic State, the ISIS, the Daesh people, who were suppressed by American attacks and everything, but they're still there. I mean, first of all, the ideology is within the people, and the people are still maybe dispersed, maybe went back to their countries, the organizational part. But if they feel that the strongest actor in the region, Israel, they can win against them, Hamas, an organization like Hamas can win, it means that they get hope and this will...
So you're saying a sign of weakness, it'll be interpreted as a sign of weakness which would then lead to other attacks?
Weakness to Israel. Israel will be attacked, but not only Israel. Then you will see these people are all around. They are in Syria, they are in Iraq, they are... Even in this region, high numbers went to ISIS. These people probably went back. The ideology is probably with them. Practically, they cannot execute it now, but if they feel that there is a resurge of energy and support, it might come back also in our region, in the West Asia, to threaten the moderate regimes. It can go to Europe. It can come to this region. Every place that there are the roots there planted. If you now give water to the plants, they might grow. Unfortunately.
Right. We've heard, this talk of this ground offensive. Some reports that the United States has, asked for a slight delay before the ground offensive proceeds. When that ground offensive, or if that ground offensive actually happens, which will probably be required to defeat Hamas, is there not a slight concern in your mind that that could be a quagmire? Because frankly, urban fighting, one thing to bomb from the skies. When you're actually going in on the ground in a heavily built up area, in an area which is very densely populated and lots of civilians out there, with an enemy that is expecting you and hiding in tunnels below, it could lead to a lot of bloodshed. It's not going to be a simple war. And it could mean a prolonged period when deaths are mounting and a time when international pressure will continue to build up on Israel. Is that the scenario which perhaps Hamas is almost expecting you to get into?
I think that Hamas are expecting us. That's why we are doing the aerial campaign to soften the places where they waited for us, where they prepared tunnels, booby traps, bombs. All that we are trying to eliminate before we come in. So I hope that that Israel Defense Forces are preparing for them some surprises in the sense of how we operate in comparison to the past, because they are waiting, like everyone, for us to take action like we took in the past. It's a different ballgame. It's not going to be like in the past. Casualties on our side for sure. On the other side, also probably, but that's why we asked the population, get away. Okay, Hamas are under the ground in the tunnels. Leave them to fight us. We will fight them. If there is no civilian population, as we ask them to evacuate, there will not be civilian collateral damage. That's our aim here. We don't want them to use the human shields, their population, and we want, that's the idea here. I think if it's done as it should be done, there will be much less collateral damage than any other option that we have.
Of course, the other wild card in all of this is the extent to which it broadens. I mean, I've heard you saying and others saying that there was an Iranian hand in this and maybe Iranian planning, in which case, again, Iran would be expecting exactly what you're saying. So the question is, what happens on the north with Hezbollah? What happens with Syria? What happens with Iran directly? And there are lots of wild cards out there, which I'm sure you don't completely know right now.
So there is no doubt, I think, in anyone's mind who knows the Middle East and what's happening in seeing the picture, that Iran is behind it one way or another. First is that Iran has been sponsoring, training, and equipping Hamas for many, many years. Second, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is really part of it's as if it's part of the Iranian army, Revolutionary Guards. They immediately started threatening and starting a low-intensity war against Israel on the northern border, and threatening Israel that if we go to ground offense, they will open a full-scale war. Houthis from Yemen, that are Iranian arms, also shot about 20 objects. I say objects because UAVs and the cruise missiles that were intercepted by a U.S. ship there were shot towards Israel. In Syria, probably Shiite militias shot also from the Golan Heights towards Israel. They're trying to give us the feeling that everything is erupting. But since, as I said before, we have no other option. And we sent the warnings to Hezbollah. And we told them, if there will be war, they have up to 130, 150,000 rockets accurate because Iran helped them make them more accurate and very heavy load rockets. So they can create damage, but so can we. So we warned them, we don't want a second front. Don't make us open it because we know how to deal with two fronts. So we are hoping that they don't do that. I hope that the Iranians are smart enough to understand that if they open two fronts, they will lose two arms that they have. Both of them are arms of Iran. And we are well capable of taking care, cutting these two arms. Right. And this is the message to Iran. I mean, they're trying, we have a war with Iran, okay? We have a war with Iran. It's through proxy now, but we have it. It's there. We have a war with Hezbollah. It's low intensity, but it's there. Our first priority now is taking care of eliminating the Hamas, ISIS terror organization.
Right. As this happens, of course, you must be keeping an eye on world opinion, on global opinion, on the scenes that we're seeing on the streets, including in America, in Europe, and other places. If you're looking at that, it almost seems that a lot of the outrage and the larger number of the crowds and all of that are almost saying Israel is to blame out here. Israel is responsible for dead Palestinian children. Israel is responsible for the humanitarian crisis. The original terror attack is almost, sidelined or been forgotten in all of this. Are you bemused by this sort of international reaction?
I'm used to it. I'm a 34-year veteran diplomat, served a lot in US and Europe. It's always like that. It's always like that. Look, we are outnumbered in the world. We are 15 million Jews in the world. Almost 8 million out of them, 7.5, 8 million out of them in Israel. Okay? That's the reality. We are always a minority. In the UN, in the General Assembly, we always lose because the Arab group, together with the non-aligned, are automatic majority. We know that. It's a question of doing the right thing. We are supported by I think, almost all the democratic governments in the world, especially the big ones. US is there, Europe, the majority of the countries. Look at the number of leaders who came from the leaders of Germany, of France, of the US, of course, Biden. Many, many leaders came to Israel, to Austria, Czech Republic, to share or show their solidarity with Israel. The leadership level, we are there. Street level, you cannot, you have people who automatically, it's very hard after such a tragedy like October 7, not for normal people, not to have some empathy towards Israel. But what happened is that this false accusation of the hospital, they just waited for the time to go back to the zone of comfort, these people. Because most of them, originally dislike Israel and, and now, you see in the hospital, false accusation, it was amazing, by the way, that we didn't finish counting the bodies, we are not sure yet and everything. But 5 minutes after the short firing of the rocket, 471 people. They counted already, 471. Then, by the way, one by one, the Americans came out separately and said that their intelligence intel, their own intel says it's not Israel. And then the French came out and said not Israel. And I saw also that they said that the casualty number is probably close to 50 maximum. So, the whole thing, and again, people went to the basics. So people who are against Israel found it as a good excuse to run back to Israel, even when the stories were retracted and everything. It doesn't matter. Facts don't matter.
People are going with whatever their beliefs are.
Yeah.
How do you see the sort of response that has come from India? There was very strong condemnation from Prime Minister Modi on day one, very strong view against terror. At the same time, expressions about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the sending of supplies there. I know that you've said that you would like India to declare Hamas as a terror outfit, but in general, what's been the reaction from India?
So first of all, it was very swift and strong by Prime Minister Modi, because in the afternoon, I think around 4:30, 4:45, India time, he already tweeted a very strong condemnation to terror and support to Israel. He did the second tweet after he spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu a few days later. But he was among the first, I think, leaders to do that, and he did it in a clear way. And when the full picture was not clear yet, we then thought that the numbers are much, much, much lesser. We didn't understand the magnitude yet, and I think that was very, very strong and very, very important. It's okay, humanitarian. We also care about humanitarian. I separate, and that's why I don't like when UN Secretary General doesn't understand why we blew up on him. And I will tell you very simply, there is no context for murdering, raping, kidnapping, all these atrocities, decapitating. There is no context for that. This is inhumane, and humane people should deplore that and not start saying you have to see it in a wider context. There is no context. There is no political, there is no any other context. This is undone. Humans don't do that. And this had to be deplored. And that's why we don't see any justification to do that. The condemnation has to be clear. At the same time, after you condemned in a very strong way, you can say, okay, let's see how we are coming out of it, what we are doing for the future, how can we better or worse. I separate the humanitarian one. We are helping the humanitarian too. We did humanitarian convoys here already for almost a week now coming in. It's okay.
So is that okay? So, for example, the reaction that would strike you as being the normal, correct reaction almost to this is to say condemnation of the terror attack with no ifs and buts, nothing justified the slaughter of innocents in that brutal manner. At the same time, effort should be done to minimize humanitarian and civilian deaths in Gaza, and people should not suffer unnecessarily. And at some point in the future, we will have to try and figure out a long-term solution to whatever issues there are there. Is that a fair?
Yeah. I think it is a fair. And I said that the thumb rule that I put also on Twitter, that scroll down the feed of the people who are now criticizing Israel and see if on October 7th, did they unequivocally condemn this attack without ifs and context or everything. Just said, this is not humane, not acceptable. We share the grief with Israel. Okay, we condemn terror and we share the grief. If they did that, they bought their moral place by the table to come now and speak about the suffering of others. If they didn't do that, it means that they have only one kind of suffering. They don't care about the other suffering. So, I mean, and that's why, as I say, in India, the wide support we got here is amazing. So we speak about the Prime Minister, but people all around.
Actually, in numerical terms, India probably contributes a lot on social media to the numbers tweeting for Israel.
I think so. I think so, and it's very warm support. I mean, I said it in an interview before that I could have built probably maybe another 2 IDFs, Israeli Defense Forces size, just from the people who thought, I want to go and even fight, or join the IDF, or it's an amazing. I've been, as I said, a veteran diplomat. I served in quite many friendly countries to Israel, and I saw many friends. But here, it's so wide, so big, it's incredible.
I think, just before we end, looking a little bit at the future, once all of this, ties itself down, because already you have people saying, look at what has happened, how can things be done? Do you believe that in the future, that certain mistakes were made? I'm saying once we've gone past, as you said, you passed your test. I did pass your test, so I can now, I think I've earned the moral ticket that you said you should have to do that. The fact that settlements continued, the fact that certain hardline policies were continued, the fact that no openings were made over a period of time. Do you think all of that is something that will have to be addressed going forward? Maybe, there has to be thought. And by the way, it's not just me saying this. There were a lot of people when I was in Israel in March who said the same thing.
I want to go back, first of all, to 2005, with your permission. 2005, Israel did the disengagement from Gaza. What is the disengagement? We took out of Gaza more than 10,000 Israeli civilians living there. We dismantled more than 20 communities. We went out. 2006, elections, Hamas, we left it to the Palestinian Authority. to Mahmoud Abbas. 2006 elections, Hamas wins over the Palestinian Authority. 2007, they throw them out of Gaza physically by killing, by throwing from rooftops and everything. So there are no settlements in Gaza. They are not friends of Palestinian Authority. I am amused, hardly, but amused to see the Palestinian representative around the world representing Gaza. If these representatives will want to go and visit Gaza, like their leaders, I don't know if they will go in, but they will not come alive out. They are the enemies of Hamas. But now they are speaking, and I always also about that. There is no representation without taxation. You know, if you assume you are the representative, also, okay, take also responsibility to the atrocities that they do, to the human shields, to all the rest. So you take, you know, they take the easy path and do that. So there is no background in, and Hamas do not accept, as I said in Covenant, do not accept Israel in any borders. It's not a political problem with Hamas. That's why they will disappear. We have to make them disappear. They are not partners for anything. And ISIS is not a partner for anything. So, you know, taking it now to settlements from 2005, nothing there. No Israeli. They are independent. They are running their own life. So we have an issue with the Palestinian Authority. Today, if you would want, if there would be the magic wand and you want to do the two-state solution, you can't do two-state. You can do three-state. You can do something with the Palestinian Authority, but then Gaza is a separate entity. So it's much more complicated. And I don't want to say that anyone is perfect of mistakes. This is not the issue here. But the issue is to understand that we are not in another skirmish and another. No, it's a watershed event. It's a game changer. We have to get rid of Hamas for the well-being of the Palestinian Authority, because they are risking Palestinian Authority also in Judea and Samaria, for the well-being of the moderates around the world, of Europe, of South Asia, of South Asia, all the places where there are remnants of the jihadists, because this is a real threat.
Master Gilon, we're going to have to leave it there. There will be a time to come and have a conversation about the long-term future of the Middle East. This perhaps is not it. We'll come back and have a conversation with you on that at a later date. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.